I have so many conversations with myself that I don't usually feel confident having in social setups. But I am pretty sure I am not alone. Join me on this podcast as I have these conversations unapologetically loud. My name is June Robinson, and welcome to another episode of Cut the Monologue. Hi, hello. Welcome to another episode of this series, the three-part series. Will I really say three-part considering it's three different episodes, just somehow having the same tone? I don't know. Let me know. But welcome to the second episode of this month. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am so excited about this episode because I feel like it is something that should be spoken about, and it should be spoken about unapologetically loud, just as our hashtag. And thank you so much for joining. On this week's episode, or on this episode, we are talking about whispers of loss, unraveling the unspoken realities of grief. So, as I had also shared on my last episode, is that last year I lost my father. And my father has been a big part of my life, seeing as my mom passed away when I was 3 years old. So I have had my father as the main figure. I did have a stepmom, and me and my stepmom, we did have a connection, but it took a while for the connection that I had with my stepmom to grow. So my dad was a really, really huge part of my life. Almost everything that I have learned is because of the lessons that I had with my father. My dad taught me about my clan, our origin, things like that. He empowered me. He was my biggest cheerleader, my biggest motivator, and also my biggest critic. So he was a really huge part of my life, and losing him has been difficult, and it still is difficult. I get waves of pain. I get, memory flashes even when I don't want them. And they have gotten pretty intense, especially during this period. And I just wanted to talk about the unspoken realities of grief that people seem to never want to talk about. So, one of the reasons why I want to talk, or the significance that I feel is necessary in addressing the unspoken realities of grief, is because it dismantles the pervasive silence that surrounds a deeply universal human experience. Grief is often shrouded in societal discomfort and misconceptions, and it extends far beyond conventional timelines and societal expectations. Whatever timelines have been put that, provide a guide on how grief should take place, it often doesn't flow like that. And by openly acknowledging and discussing the multifaceted aspects of grief, from the isolating nature and unpredictable emotional manifestations to the societal pressures of swiftly moving on, I believe we are able to create a space for empathy, understanding, and healing. The unspoken realities of grief, when brought into the light, they not only validate the diverse ways individuals navigate loss, but also foster a supportive environment where people can share their stories without fear of judgment. Such conversations pave the way for societal compassion and helps in debunking myths and timely contributing to a more compassionate and informed approach to grief, thereby empowering individuals to navigate their unique journeys with authenticity and resilience. So, now that we are discussing about grief, I think the first thing is we have to understand what is grief. And grief is a complex and multifaceted emotional response to loss. And loss encompasses a range of feelings, and reactions that individuals experience when confronted with the absence of significant change of someone or something that they deeply care about. Grief in our times, or if I may say, grief, whenever you hear someone talking about, I'm going through grief, we commonly associate it with the death of a loved one, but then grief extends to various forms of loss. It could be the end of a relationship. You could be grieving because, a relationship that you had, be it emotional or platonic, has come to an end. The loss of a job, especially if you feel like that job was extremely pivotal in your life. Significant life transition, okay? And grief involves a dynamic and non-linear process characterized by emotional, cognitive, physical, and behavioral manifestations. When someone is in the process of grieving, a lot of feelings are manifested. And these feelings could be sadness, it could be anger, it could be guilt. Some people feel confused, especially in a moment where you've just received the news, you feel confused. Your world is shaken. And sometimes moments of relief, especially when the thing that you've lost gave you some form of pain or some form of anxiety. So when you hear that it no longer exists, you feel some form of relief. The duration of and intensity of grief, it varies widely among individuals. How people process their grief, how people heal, it varies. And therefore, this challenges the notion of a standardized time of healing. It is a deeply personal journey influenced by so many things. Among them are social and individual factors and also cultural factors. And therefore, we need to emphasize the need for compassion and understanding as people navigate the intricate terrain of grief. One of the reasons why I'm saying that, grief is not only tied to the loss of a loved one is because the moment you go through a life transition, whether it's positive or negative life transition, it can trigger a grief response as you start navigating the emotional impact of alteration or separation from something significant. For example, if you have been married and you loved this person, but then things happen in marriage. I personally am not married, but I have had situations where I have engaged with married people and the relationship comes to an end. It may give you a sigh of relief, but you end up also going through grief because this is someone who maybe you have been together for the past 10 years and they are no longer going to be in your life. So you will go through a period of grief where you will be trying to heal, coming to terms with the reality that is happening or that is unfolding before you go back to a sense of normalcy or before you adapt some form of newness to the reality that has occurred. At times you are maybe job hunting and you get a job that is taking you out of the country. So it's nice because that's something positive. It's something that you wanted. It's greener pastures. But then at the same time, it's okay to grieve about the fact that you are leaving behind things that you're familiar with. You're probably leaving behind your family, you're leaving behind your friends. Maybe you're in a relationship and your relationship is now changing to long distance. So this is something that positive that has happened in your life. But that doesn't mean that it carries with it some negativity. And just because it's something positive, it doesn't mean that you do not have the right to grieve about, the negative aspect that comes with it. Okay. So such experiences, they disrupt familiar routines, they disrupt identities, the identity that you have had for a long period of time, and expectations, leading people to grapple with a sense of loss, adjustment, and the need to reevaluate their lives. Recognizing that grief exists in the context of diverse life changes, it emphasizes its universal nature and reinforces the understanding that mourning is a natural response to any significant alteration in one's emotional or physical landscape. So we have different types of grief, and I want to say I was shocked when I came across some of this, not because I didn't know them, but because I didn't think that they have a categorization. Okay, so it's not that I wasn't familiar with, oh, like this actually exists, but it's because I didn't think that it has a categorization. So we have something called anticipatory grief. So anticipatory grief occurs before the actual loss, often when individuals anticipate the impending death of a loved one due to a terminal illness. It involves a range of emotions. So I will say, because I did share this on my last episode, my dad had been sick from, I'm holding back the tears, I'm sorry. My dad had been sick from early December all the way to the time of his death, which was the 23rd of February. And around late December, as we were just, almost celebrating New Year's, and just that, because my dad got to a place where he started being stubborn with going to hospital for his dialysis. Like I said, he needed to go to hospital twice in a week for his dialysis. So he would sometimes become stubborn and be like, I don't want to go, just let me go. I have lived my life, I have enjoyed it, I've done my thing, I've built my legacy, let me go. I went through a period where I had anticipatory grief. Part of me felt like he wasn't going to make it. And I hate that I had that. I hate that I didn't have a strong faith in him healing. But I know my dad. I have seen my dad sick. I mean, we all have seen our parents sick, and we've seen them being healthy after the sickness. But for some reason, during this period when I would see my dad and I would talk to my dad, I felt that this is it. This is it. It's here. So I had anticipatory grief. And, people would say like, oh, he's still there. I would get myself out of the crying by saying, he's still there. I can still hear his voice, etc., things like that. But I didn't know that by anticipating, by knowing that this is potentially the end for him, that I was going through anticipatory type of grief. The other type of grief that is there is disenfranchised grief, and this is experienced when individuals face a loss that is not openly acknowledged or socially supported. For example, we have people who really, really love their pets. They are pet lovers. They love their dogs. They love their cats. Maybe they have a goldfish and they really love them, and then they die. So this is like, especially in the Kenyan culture, if I'm not wrong, maybe there is a class of Kenyans that I have not reached or that I have not had the ability to interact with, that when they lose their pets, they can openly say, and people will send in flowers and will send in the condolences. But the class of Kenyans that I am interacting with and the class of Kenyans that I am in is that one where if your dog is dead, it feels weird trying to call people and tell them that, I lost my dog, and expect flowers and expect messages of condolence and expect people to understand the pain that you're feeling. Mainly because they're like, it's a pet. It's not looked at as something that has a strong emotional connection. if I am communicating to you. So that is disenfranchised grief, and it's something that does exist. We have ambiguous loss where as an individual you experience a situation of uncertainty or lack of closure. This is something that people who have loved ones who have disappeared go through, because you never really know if they died or if they are alive but they do not want anything to do with you. So you do not know what to feel. You do not know if you're crying because they are dead or if you're crying because they don't want anything to do with you. So that is an ambiguous grief. We have complicated grief, which goes beyond the normal grieving process, persisting for an extended period and significantly impairing daily functioning, and it may involve feelings of yearning, difficulty affecting the loss, and struggles to find meaning. And in most cases, this is where professional help comes in, because, when you go to a therapist, they are able to give you some form of guidance towards the solution that you find. We have as well, the last one being collective grief, which it refers to the shared mourning experienced by communities or society in response to significant events, such as natural disasters, like, things like earthquake, where if it happens in a particular community, the whole community is able to feel that loss, it's able to feel a pain, pandemics or large-scale tragedies. So this is these different types of griefs, they exist, and they are things that we should acknowledge, and we should be able to point out which type of grief are you going through as an individual and how best can I deal with it. Okay, so we have, when it comes to the unspoken realities of grief, we also have societal expectations and the pressure that is usually placed on individuals to overcome the grief. So societal expectations and the pressure to swiftly overcome grief constitutes a pervasive challenge that many individuals encounter during their grieving process. Society, as we know it, often operates on a tacit timeline for grief. They believe that, as a widow, maybe you should mourn for 9 months, and then after 9 months, you should be okay, and things like that. This promotes the idea that there is a prescribed period within which individuals should move through their sorrow and resume normalcy. This expectation is in most cases reinforced by cultural norms, workplace policies, and even interpersonal interactions that may inadvertently convey impatience with prolonged mourning. So the pressure to get over grief quickly, it can lead to a sense of isolation for those who need more time, as they may internalize feelings of inadequacy or guilt for not conforming to societal expectations. The pressure that is also placed upon individuals who are going through grief has a possibility of hindering the healing process, compelling individuals to mask their grief, or rush through important emotional stages. So I want to speak mainly on my experience. And when my dad passed away on the 23rd of Feb was on a Thursday. I was actually on my way to work. I was like 10 minutes away from where I am stationed. And my brother called me and he was like, Dad has just passed away. I have received the call. He's no more. I just want you to know, and just letting me know, because we all know there is that culture of relatives quickly posting on social media and all that. So he didn't want me to find out like that. And also because where I work, I am not allowed with my phone while I am on floor. So my phone is usually away from me. And I remember calling my supervisor, and then I alighted at the next stage and I took another bus and I came back to my place. So that was Thursday when I received the news. So I stayed home Thursday and my brother came and picked me up. I was bawling, crying. My brother came and picked me and took me, went to his place. So I stayed at his place on Thursday, on Friday, on Saturday, on Sunday. Monday is usually my off day. And then on Tuesday, I had to go back to work. I felt so bad about having to go back to work. I will not lie. Because I did not have that strength. And in all honesty, I didn't want people at work knowing. The news found its way of leaking, which is something that I did not want, because and the reason why I didn't want people at work to know is because I wanted work to be normal. I knew I wasn't going to be normal, but I wanted the people who I was interacting with to be normal towards me. So I was not ready to go back to work. Honestly, I just felt like I needed to continue staying home. And I remember my brother was like, are you sure you're going to be okay? If you're not okay, just go back home. I was so sad. I hated it. And this is just an example because now, during that time, I had to wear a mask. And I would get emotional waves. I would get moments of, oh God, my dad is not here. Like, and my job entails engaging with people, and I would be like, my dad is not here, but I still have to work, so I would mask my feelings, and I did the masking pretty well, but I feel like because of that, there is a part of me that never really processed the aspect of losing my dad, maybe in the way that I would have wanted to. Okay. So, and then, after that, the funeral date was finally set in and everything. So I continued working because the funeral date was on the 10th of March. So I continued working until the 5th of March. From 27th, I continued working throughout that week, and then I took a break. Buried my dad on the 10th, which was a Friday, but I was back at work on 15th, which is a Wednesday. I felt like I went back to work too soon, but I am employed, and that's the company policy. You can't stay away too long and things like that. So this pressure to quickly overcome grief, it significantly hinders the natural grieving process in several ways. And, first and foremost of those ways is that it may lead individuals to suppress or deny their emotions in an effort to meet external expectations. As in my case, I had to mask what I was feeling because you can't have, customers coming in and seeing you sorrowful or seeing you crying or seeing your eyes red or seeing your eyes puffy because of crying. I still had to be in my best form. Okay. So this emotional suppression, it impedes the healthy expression of grief, preventing individuals from fully processing their feelings and coming to terms with the loss. The pressure to expedite the grieving process, I'm so sorry for that, may push individuals to adopt a facade of normalcy prematurely. This surface level conformity can create a sense of disconnection between the internal emotional turmoil and the external portrayal, contributing to the lack of authenticity in the grieving process. Rushing through grief may also result in individuals neglecting essential stages of mourning, such as reflection, acceptance, and meaning making. So each of these stages, it plays a crucial role to the eventual adaptation to the loss and the development of resilience. When you bypass these stages, as an individual, you may struggle to find closure and may experience prolonged emotional distress. with this discussion of today, we also are going to look at some of the misconceptions that surround grief, and we are going to address them. So one of the most common misconceptions about grief is the notion of a fixed timeline for healing. And this perpetuates unrealistic expectations, and it hinders the understanding of the true nature of the grieving process. One prevalent misconception is the belief that grief follows a linear trajectory with neatly defined stages that individuals should progress through in a specific order within a predetermined time frame. These stages, and I'm sure a majority of us have probably heard of it, but for those who haven't, they're usually 5 stages, and their order is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then you finally accept that, I went through this and this person, and now I have accepted. I was angry, I was in denial, I bargained, and now I have accepted. But then the reality is, grief is highly individualized, it's non-linear, and lacks a one-size-fits-all timeline. People oscillate between different stages of grief. People get to revisit emotions or experience unexpected setbacks, all of which are entirely normal. Like, I know sometimes I get angry again that my dad died. And at times I have accepted it, that my dad has died, and I am okay, and I have fun and everything. And then I go back and I'm just like, my dad died? I'm again in denial. And then I accept. And that is what I have been going through, in all honesty. I have days where I come from work and I don't feel like engaging with everyone and anyone. I lock myself in the room, I put on music, and I cry. And I silently cry. And this month marks 1 year, and I am still going through the process. So by these stages that were created or that were discovered, they make it seem like grief follows a linear pattern, that everyone goes through this, when in reality, no. Some people might, and I'm not disputing that, but some people don't, and that is okay. Another misconception is the expectation that healing implies the complete erasure of grief, as if one can neatly move on from the loss. That's a lie. I mean, my mom passed away when I was 3 years old, but I have moments in my age that I cry and I miss her. And I don't know what I am missing, because honestly, I don't remember. I don't have any memories of engaging with my mom, but I miss her. The truth about healing from grief is that it involves adaptation and the integration of the loss into one's life, and not the elimination of pain. The pain never goes away. And this is why there's this idea of closure that is often associated with a fixed timeline, and it's misleading. Grief flows throughout a person's lifetime. You just learn to integrate it into your life and not eliminate it. The pain. The unspoken realities of grief also comes with the stigma of prolonged grieving, whereby individuals who experience this, they often face the added burden of societal stigma, which can compound the challenges of their grieving process. There is a prevailing societal expectation that grief should follow a defined timeline. So the individuals who continue to experience significant distress beyond what is deemed socially acceptable may encounter judgment or misunderstanding. And this stigma is heavily rooted on the misconception about the appropriate duration of grief, and may be exacerbated by cultural norms that prioritize resilience. with this perception that, your mourning period should be 9 months, your mourning period should be 6 months, it makes individuals who have prolonged periods of grief to seem weak or have an inability to cope. And this leads to these same individuals internalizing this stigma, feeling ashamed or isolated in their struggles. So friends, family, and even well-intentioned support networks, they may unknowingly contribute to this stigma by expressing impatience or encouraging the bereaved to move on. In reality, prolonged grief, also known as complicated grief, is a recognized mental health condition that can result from various factors, such as the nature of loss, like, maybe this person left the house early in the morning and they got an accident on the road. This is not someone who was sick. This is not someone who you expected to not come back home in the evening. This is not someone who you expected was not going to call you anymore, So the nature of loss can contribute to prolonged grieving, existing mental health issues, or even the lack of support. The lack of support from people who you deem close can actually contribute to prolonged grieving. So, grief leads to isolation and feelings of loneliness. With its complex and overwhelming emotions, it has the potential of creating a profound sense of isolation and loneliness for those experiencing. One of the primary contributors to this isolation is the societal discomfort and misunderstanding surrounding grief, where friends and family members, unsure of how to support someone in mourning, may inadvertently withdraw, fearing they might say or do the wrong thing. This leaves the grieving individual feeling alone in their pain without the expected network of support. So it also has the potential of causing isolation even within close relationships. And I feel like I went through a period of isolation mainly because I didn't feel anyone would understand how losing my dad caused a shakeup in my reality. And so I did share it. I called some friends. I was like, my dad passed and things like that. Some of my friends were able to contribute towards the burial and just show me financial support. And some of them would even be like, if you want someone to talk to, don't be shy, give me a call and everything. But then I didn't know how to interact with anyone in my state. I didn't know how to do it. So I isolated my feelings. If anyone would ask me, how are you? I'll just be like, no, I'm good, I'm okay. And things like that. But then looking into it, things like building a supportive community, because I had instances where I felt like I needed someone to talk to, but I didn't know who. And I didn't want it to be a therapist. I wanted it to be someone who is close to me. But I didn't know anyone who is close to me who would understand the relationship that I have with my dad. And so I would encourage people to build a supportive community. It helps in the validation of grief, whereby your supportive community is able to acknowledge and validate the diverse emotions that accompany grief. It also helps in breaking the silence, because grief carries a societal stigma that can lead to individuals to suffer in silence. Therefore, when you have a supportive community, it's able to encourage you to have open dialogue about loss and create a space where people can share their stories, fears, and pain. Shared understanding. And this is where individuals with a supportive community that have also experienced loss that is similar or almost similar to what you're going through, is able to form, an understanding that cultivates empathy and compassion, because the members can draw, from their own personal experience of grief and what they went through. And so it also gives you practical assistance, and it offers the diverse perspective. By going through grief, it manifests itself in so many ways, and this could be physical and emotional. And emotional could be things like, intense sadness because you have lost someone. And sadness can be fluctuating. That is, you could be happy one week and sad the next. You could be happy, a particular hour and sad the next hour. We also, you could also go through anguish and despair that stems from the profound sense of loss and the challenges of adjusting to life without the departed. You could have guilt and regret, whereby you could be questioning your past actions or decisions related to the deceased or the circumstances of the loss. Like, I remember when my dad passed, I was like, and by the way, my dad never used to like us traveling to shags. So I remember when he passed, I would be like, I wish I traveled home more and things like that. Even though I knew that he would have opposed to me constantly traveling home, but I still couldn't drop that feeling that I wish I traveled home more often than I did. We also have physical manifestations of grief, and these are things like exhaustion and fatigue, changes in your appetite, physical ailments. You could start having a fever, you could have headaches, sleep disturbances, which is also a physical manifestation of grief. And then we have cognitive manifestations such as difficulty in concentrating, memory challenges, and also behavioral manifestations such as withdrawal and isolation, and changes in routine. So we have experts that shared their insights and that reveal the diverse way of that grief can manifest. And the founder of the 5 stages of grief, who is Dr. Kabler-Ross, emphasized that while her model provided a framework, the stages are not necessarily linear or universal. And so that is something that I think we need to understand. The stages might be there: the anger, denial, bargaining, depression and acceptance. The stages are there, but it doesn't mean that you flow through these stages one after the other. You could be angry and accept the next day, or you could be bargaining and angry the next. So it doesn't follow a linear path. That is because grief is unpredictable. It has a non-linear progression. You constantly get waves of grief. That is what I've said. You could have moments of intense anger and intensely crying, and then immediately you switch up and you're like, okay, they're gone. What else can I do? Let me go back to, normalcy. Let me go back to the reality. There are also unpredictable triggers. Like I have said, to me, especially in this month, I am just triggered. I don't know what's triggering me. Maybe it's the mood, but I'm just getting triggers and it's making me sad. Even coming up with, these episodes, they are triggers and they're making me sad. We have intermittent moments of relief where you feel like you're good with the situation. So all these are some of the unpredictable nature that grief occurs. Okay. And in all of this, we need coping mechanisms. You need to be able to know, how can I cope with this? And we have healthy coping strategies, and we have unhealthy. One of them is professional therapy, especially when the person played an extremely pivotal role in your life. You probably need to seek professional help by sitting down with a therapist and talking about your feelings. One thing that I know is that talking helps. Talking helps to ease the thoughts that are running through your mind. Having support groups. It could be your close friends who understand the dynamics of your relationship with the person who you've lost, or with the situation that has brought about grief in your life. Or it could be support groups with people who have gone through the same situation as you have. Self-care practices, engage in activities that redirect your thinking, activities that give you a new identity, or activities that occupy your thinking. You could also practice mindful meditation that helps you to stay present and in the moment, and also cultivate a sense of inner calm. Establishing new rituals, seeking comfort in faith or spirituality, because some people feel like if they lean on faith, it gives them the hope of a better tomorrow. Setting realistic goals. So it's really important to come up with healthy ways that you're able to cope with the grief. Okay? Unhealthy coping mechanisms comes with dangers. And some of the dangers that come with unhealthy coping are things like prolonged emotional distress, physical health consequence, complicated grief, and it may also impact your relationships, be it platonic or emotional. And we need to be able to have healthy ways of coping with grief. So all in all, in this episode, we have delved into the unspoken realities of grief and highlighted how grief has a multifaceted nature, and helped to dispel some common misconceptions, like the fact that grief follows a linear trajectory. We have been able to explore the significance of addressing grief beyond what the society expects, and emphasize that it's not limited to death, and that grief can stem from various life changes. And so, with all this, you need to challenge societal expectations and foster empathy and understanding for those that are navigating the intricate and unique terrain of grief. So you need to acknowledge that there are realities put forth by society that are unrealistic, especially when it comes to grief. And if you have undergone grief in your life, you need to understand what type of grief is that, and how can I come up with healthy ways of coping with this grief. Remember, grief is not something that you can eliminate, but it's something that you find a way of integrating it into your daily life. And with that, I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. I know this episode is slightly longer, but if you have listened to the end, thank you so much. Like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for listening. That's it for this episode of Cut the Monologue. Be sure to follow us on our social media platforms at Cut the Monologue. That is Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. And also follow us on all streaming platforms and turn your notifications on to always get notified whenever we drop an episode. Until the next episode, goodbye for now.